I want you to picture a scene for a moment. It's a thick, foggy morning in London. It's December 27th, 1857.
Okay.
You're walking into this massive, cavernous hall, and there are thousands of people packed in, just shoulder to shoulder. And they're all dead silent. They're hanging on the words of one man.
It's a powerful image to start with. And usually when we do these deep dives, we're looking at, modern tech trends, maybe neuroscience, political history.
Right.
But today, the sources you've handed me are, well, they're a bit different. We are looking at a transcript of that exact moment you just described.
Right. It's a sermon by Charles Spurgeon. And I have to admit, when I saw the date 1857, I was a little skeptical. I thought, okay, are we just reading a history textbook today?
Sure.
But as I started going through this, I realized this isn't really about history. It felt more like a psychology lecture.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Spurgeon is known historically as the Prince of Preachers, but in this text, he's operating like a surgeon. I mean, he's dissecting human nature.
Yeah.
The source material is titled, "What Have I Done?" which is based on a verse from the book of Jeremiah. And honestly, if you strip away the Victorian language, the psychological pressure he applies here is absolutely timeless. What have I done? It sounds simple enough, just 4 words. But the way he uses it, it's intense. It feels like he's trying to corner the listener in a room with no exits.
He absolutely is. You have to remember the context. It's the very end of the year. The crowd is looking back on 1857, getting ready for 1858.
Right, that moment of reflection.
It's that natural moment of reflection we all have. Spurgeon seizes that. He uses this question, what have I done, as a battering ram. He wants to break down every excuse we use to avoid looking at ourselves.
So the mission for this deep dive is to figure out how he does that. We're going to unpack the metaphors, the arguments, and the way he forces us to confront our own biographies. And I want to start with the first thing that jumped out at me. He starts right out of the gate by calling us all ostriches.
Yes, the silly ostrich. It's quite the opening gambit. It's a funny image, but he's making a really serious point about how our brains work, right?
Right. He's identifying a cognitive bias that we're all familiar with, even if we don't call it that. The ostrich buries its head in the sand because it operates on this logic. If I can't see the hunter can't see me. Spurgeon argues that humans do the exact same thing with their conscience. We think if we don't think about our mistakes, they didn't happen.
It's willful ignorance. If I don't look at the credit card bill, the debt doesn't exist.
Exactly. He says we are near bankruptcy in a moral sense. And just like a business owner who knows they're losing money, we are terrified to open the account books. We'd rather not know.
There's this one line in the text that really stuck with me. He talks about our memory as if it's an author writing a biography of our lives. And it says if we actually had to read a truthful history of what we've done, every thought, every action, we would buy a huge iron clasp and a padlock to shut the book.
Because it's a book full of lamentation and woe. It's a heavy metaphor. He's saying we are actively suppressing our own history because it's just too painful to look at.
Yeah.
But then, and this is where he's so effective, he hits you with practical, almost business-like logic to counter that fear.
The tradesman analogy.
Yes. He asks a simple question. Does a tradesman ever get poorer just by looking at his books?
No, obviously not. The numbers are the numbers, whether you see them or not.
Precisely. Checking the ledger doesn't cause the poverty. The bad trading did. Spurgeon's argument is that you might find out you're poor, but isn't it better to know that while you still have time to fix it? He's basically saying, don't walk blindfolded into the afterlife.
That makes a lot of sense. Ignoring your bank account balance doesn't mean you have money. But he takes it a step further than just checking your books. He uses this imagery of the tinderbox. Can we talk about that? Because it felt a little combustible.
It is. He's stripping away the false sense of security. He says a person might look like a fair green tree on the outside. You look put together, you have a nice job, you smile at the neighbors.
Right.
But he argues that inside you might be rotten wood. You're just waiting for the devil's tinderbox to ignite you.
So it's the contrast between the public PR version of ourselves and the private reality.
And that's the trap of the ostrich. You're polishing the outside while the inside is rotting.
Okay, so that's us hiding from ourselves. But then Spurgeon shifts the camera angle. He moves from us looking at us to how God looks at us. And I have to be honest, I was expecting the classic fire and brimstone here. I was waiting for the angry lightning bolt. But that's not what's in the text.
No, and that's a common misconception about Victorian preaching. Spurgeon depicts God here not as a distant judge, but as what I'd call a divine eavesdropper. But it's surprisingly intimate. He He describes God as stooping from his throne.
Stooping. That implies effort, like he's trying to get closer to hear better.
Exactly. The text says God puts his ear to the lips of the faintest breather. He's listening so closely he can hear a sigh.
There's that line. He finds music in a sigh and beauty in a tear. That is surprisingly poetic for a sermon about judgment.
It is. But that beauty makes the tragedy worse. Spurgeon points out that God is listening intently, numbering the hairs on your head, watching your footsteps. But he's not hearing what he wants to hear.
What is he listening for?
Repentance, an honest admission. The verse says, I hearkened and heard, but they spake not aright. God is waiting for anyone to just say, what have I done? But instead, he gets silence or excuses.
So it's not an angry God. It's a disappointed one.
Spurgeon calls it an amiable grief. It raises the stakes significantly. It's one thing to break a rule and anger a policeman. It's another thing entirely to break the heart of someone who is stooping down, desperate to help you. It turns the sin into a personal rejection.
That's a heavy pivot.
Yeah.
So you have the ostriches hiding our heads, and you have God listening and hearing nothing. Now, Spurgeon seems to anticipate that some people in the crowd, and probably listening to us right now, are thinking, well, I'm not an ostrich. I'm a good person. I pay my taxes. I don't kick puppies. This doesn't apply to me.
Ah, yes, the moralist. This is one of my favorite parts of the argumentation because he dismantles this defense mechanism so surgically. This is the person who relies on their own goodness as a safety net.
And Spurgeon attacks this with the make-weight concept. Now, I've heard that term before, but usually in boxing or maybe old school trading, what exactly does he mean by make-weight here?
Well, think of an old-fashioned scale in a market. You put your goods on one side and weights on the other. If you're a little short, you toss in a small extra weight, a make weight, just to tip the balance in your favor.
Okay.
Spurgeon is arguing that people try to treat Jesus Christ as a make weight.
So I'll do 90% of the work with my good behavior, and I'll just use a little bit of Jesus to
top me off. Exactly. I'm mostly good, so I just need a little help. Spurgeon's stance is hardline. Christ will not go halves with you. He says if you are trusting in your own ledger, your own morality, you are building a card house on the sand.
A house of cards. We all know how sturdy those are.
Right. He says it might look beautiful. It might be a very polite, well-mannered house of cards, but when the tempest comes, meaning death or crisis, it falls just as flat as a pile of dirt. He actually says good works are good for nothing if you are using them to try and buy your own salvation.
That sounds incredibly harsh to modern ears. Good works are good for nothing.
He clarifies, thankfully. He admits that socially, for society, good works are infinitely better than crime. He'd rather have a moral neighbor than a thief.
Sure.
But, and this is the key point, he argues they have no saving merit. You can't use them as a ladder to heaven. It's the difference between being a nice person and being a saved person in his theology.
So the moralist is out. The checkbook doesn't balance. But then he goes after a different group, the careless people, the ones who just kind of drift through life.
Right.
And this section, I call this linguistic forensics.
I like that.
Because he forces people to rename their habits. He says we use film to cover our hearts. We use euphemisms.
This is a brilliant rhetorical device. We love to soften our bad behavior with soft language. Spurgeon just stops the tape and says, no, say what it really is.
Okay, let's role play this a bit to show what he does, because the specific examples he uses are wild. Let's say I'm in the audience. I say, look, I just had a little mirth, maybe a glass too much at the party.
And Spurgeon shouts, stop, what is the real name? The answer is drunkenness.
Okay, well, I just had merry spree, a bit of loose talk with the guys.
Translation, lascivious conversation.
What about work? It's just a matter of business, or tricks of the trade. Everyone does it.
That is stealing.
Ouch. Okay, one more. I just wish my competitor across the street would lose some customers so I can pick them up.
That is covetousness. And potentially idolatry of money.
It's so uncomfortable. He's just stripping away the polite society varnish.
He argues that once you use the real names, the list of sins becomes black indeed. You can't brush it off as just being human anymore. He's forcing you to look at the ugly reality of the biography you're writing.
He's really cornering the listener here.
Yeah.
You can't hide like an ostrich. You can't claim you're a moralist. You can't use soft language.
No.
But then, and this surprised me, he turns the cannon on himself.
This is crucial for his credibility. If he just stood there pointing fingers, he'd be insufferable. But he addresses the Christian's burden. He talks about the starless crown.
Now, for someone who doesn't speak Victorian Christian, what is a starless crown?
In this tradition, stars in your crown represent the souls of people you have helped save or influence for the better. A starless crown represents a Christian who gets into heaven, but they've been useless. They've never helped anyone else get there.
It's like showing up to the Olympics, putting on the uniform, and then just sitting on the bench the whole time.
Exactly. It's a disgrace in Spurgeon's eyes. And he gets very vulnerable here. He asks himself, what have I done? He confesses that he fears he sometimes lacks earnestness. He says he worries the blood of souls might lie at his door if he doesn't preach as a dying man to dying men.
A dying man to dying men. That is urgent.
It shows he's in the trench with them. He contrasts the barren fig tree, the unproductive Christian, with a story of a woman who finally brought a soul to Christ and wept with joy. He wants his listeners to feel that desire to be productive, not just passive.
And speaking of influence and urgency, we have to talk about the darkest part of this deep dive. Section 6. This is where the source material takes a turn into what I'd almost call psychological horror.
Yes, the horror of influence.
Spurgeon asks, what have I done? But applies it to how we impact others. And he tells two stories here that are just gut-wrenching. The first is the cruel mother.
This one is hard to read. He describes a widow who worked her fingers to the bone. She fed her 6 children, clothed them, put a roof over their heads. Physically, she was the perfect mother. But she realizes she never taught them about God, never looked after their souls. And in the text, she calls herself a wretch and a cruel mother because she fed their bodies but starved their eternal spirits.
Wow.
It's a devastating critique of parenting that focuses only on material success.
And then he pivots to the tavern companion. This felt like a scene from a Dickens novel or maybe a horror movie.
It's very cinematic. He talks about a man who takes a young, virtuous friend, he calls him Jackson, to a tavern. He laughs at Jackson's hesitation, introduces him to London life, teaches him to drink and be loose. He corrupts him.
And Jackson dies.
Jackson dies. And here is where Spurgeon introduces the 2 hells theory. This is his most terrifying concept. He argues that if you lead someone astray, if you are the reason they fall, you suffer your own punishment plus the torment of seeing them in hell.
The visual he uses here, I made a note of it because it gave me chills. He describes the seduced friend, Jackson, staring through the fire.
Yes. He describes eyes like 2 stars whose light is fury, staring at the man who led him there, blaming him. You brought me here. You laughed at my scruples.
It connects back to that idea of biography we talked about earlier. Spurgeon is saying, you aren't just writing your own book, you're writing in the margins of everyone else's book, too.
That's a brilliant way to put it. It forces the listener to ask, who have I influenced? And where is that influence leading them? It's not just about personal morality anymore. It's about collateral damage.
That image of the glaring eyes, that sticks with you. But Spurgeon doesn't leave them there. He moves to the finale, and he ramps up the urgency. He uses a specific London landmark, the monument.
Right, the monument to the Great Fire of London. It has a massive spiral staircase. Spurgeon asks the listener to imagine a man climbing that staircase, stepping over the railing, the palisading, and jumping.
And he says, asking, what have I done? While your midair is useless.
Exactly. The audit must happen while you are standing on the solid ground of life. Once you jump, once you die, the books are closed. You can't change the numbers anymore.
Yeah.
He uses a paradox here that I find fascinating. The soft substance paradox.
Oh, the oil thing. I had to read that twice to get it.
It's counterintuitive. He says that oil is a soft, gentle substance, but when it catches fire, it burns the most fiercely. It's hard to extinguish.
And the analogy is?
The gentle-hearted Savior. He's saying that Jesus is love, soft and approachable like oil, but if that love is rejected, it becomes the fuel for the fiercest judgment. He says rejected love turns into a lion.
That is a powerful flip. You think of love as safe, but he's saying rejected love is dangerous.
It's the danger of missed opportunity.
And then he ends with this dramatic enactment. It's almost a soliloquy of a soul of the great book of judgment.
It's the final courtroom scene. The soul realizes there are no bolts and bars on the dungeon to remove. The imprisonment is eternal because the rejection of truth was absolute. Spurgeon is essentially acting out the worst-case scenario to scare the audience into the safety of self-reflection.
He's pleading with them. He basically says, I have no more arts to try. I've used every metaphor I have.
And that's where the power of this text lies. It's a refusal to let the listener be passive. You can't just sit there and enjoy the speech. You have to answer the question.
So we've gone from the ostrich burying its head to the linguistic tricks we use to hide our sins, all the way to the terror of the 2 hells.
It's quite a journey for a sermon from 1857.
If we had to boil this down for the listener today, someone who isn't in Victorian London, maybe not even religious, what is the takeaway?
I think the core insight is that an unexamined life isn't just not worth living, it's dangerous. Spurgeon is demanding an audit of the self. He's saying, look at the books now. Look at the real names of your actions. Because eventually, the books get open whether you like it or not.
It's about facing the reality of who you are and what you've done without the euphemisms.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of influence, it leaves us with a really provocative thought. If our actions echo in the lives of others forever, as Spurgeon suggests with the two hells theory, are we prepared to meet the people we've influenced in the afterlife?
That is a chilling thought. Not just, how am I doing, but what have I done to them?
What have you done remains the lingering question.
Well, that is certainly something to chew on as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Charles Spurgeon, a time capsule from 1857 that feels a little too relevant today. Thanks for guiding us through it.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next deep dive.